I am standing in the snow, and I am about to die. The guard's rifle is already raised. 6 other men kneel beside me in the frozen mud. I can hear their prayers, whispered in Yiddish, in Polish, in languages I barely recognize. But I am not praying. I am thinking about a book I once saw in a shop window in Brussels. A Persian grammar textbook. Green cover. Gold lettering. I never opened that book. I don't speak Persian. I don't speak Farsi. I know perhaps 3 words in that language, if you count the name of the country itself. But when the guard asks if anyone among us has a skill, any skill that might make us useful, I hear my own voice, loud, clear, desperate. I'm Persian. I can teach Persian. The rifle lowers, just slightly, just enough dot, and with those words I have just bought myself time. Time measured in invented words. Time built on lies. Time that will either save my life or condemn me to something worse than a quick bullet in the snow. My name is Gilles. At least that was my name. Now I am Reza Sharifi, a Persian Jew from Tehran, captured by the Germans far from home. Valuable because I possess knowledge of a language I do not speak. This is how I survived the Holocaust, by teaching a Nazi officer a language that never existed. Let me tell you how it began. It was 1942. The cattle car that brought us to the camp was so crowded I could not fall even if I fainted. We stood pressed against each other for 3 days. No food, no water, no air except what filtered through the cracks in the wooden slats. When the doors finally opened, the light was blinding. The cold was immediate, and the smell, God, the smell of that place. Smoke and decay and fear. They lined us up, hundreds of us, sorted us like livestock, men to one side, women to the other. I saw a mother torn from her child. I saw an old man collapse and get dragged away like garbage. I was 26 years old, educated. I spoke French, German, some English. I had worked in a bookshop in Brussels before the war. I had read Goethe and Victor Hugo. I had believed in civilization. All of that meant nothing here. We were taken to a processing area, stripped, examined, questioned. I gave them a false name, Gilles Cremure, a common enough French name. I told them I was a clerk, nothing special, nothing that would mark me for immediate execution. They took everything, our clothes, our belongings, our dignity. We were given striped uniforms that smelled of the men who had died in them before us. We were given numbers. I was 47,851. That night, in the barracks, a man named David whispered to me from the bunk below mine, "Don't tell them you're educated. Don't tell them you speak languages. The smart ones die first. They're afraid of us." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the darkness listening to the coughs and moans of dying men and wondered how long I had. Days? Weeks? I never imagined years. The work was brutal. We hauled stones, dug ditches, cleared snow, all on starvation rations, watery soup, and a piece of bread that could fit in your palm. Men died every day, collapsed in the mud, shot for working too slowly, beaten for no reason at all. I learned quickly. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Move fast, but not too fast. Blend in. Become invisible, but invisibility wouldn't save me forever. 3 months into my time at the camp, there was a selection. The guards walked through our barracks at dawn, pulling men at random. I was one of them. They marched us to a courtyard, made us kneel in the snow, and then an officer appeared, clipboard in hand, reading names. This was it. Execution. I had heard about these selections. You kneel in the courtyard and you don't get up again. The officer was young, maybe 30, clean uniform, cold eyes. He went down the line asking each man what skills they possessed, what use they might be. A tailor, shot. A teacher, shot. A baker. Sent back to the barracks, they needed bakers. A musician, shot. And then he came to me. You, what can you do? My mind went blank. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He raised his pistol, pointed it at my forehead, and that's when I remembered. The book, the green cover, the gold lettering, Persian grammar. I'm Persian, I said. From Tehran. I can teach Persian. He lowered the pistol, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a German face since arriving at the camp. Interest, double quotes, Persian? He said, Farsi? Yes, sir. My family is from Tehran. I grew up speaking Farsi. It was such an obvious lie, such a desperate, stupid lie. I don't look Persian. I look exactly like what I am, a Belgian Jew with pale skin and dark hair. But I was counting on German ignorance, on the possibility that this officer had never met a Persian in his life. He studied me for a long moment. Then he gestured to a guard. Take this one to my office. The rest finish it. As I was led away, I heard the shots begin behind me. 6 men. 6 lives ended in the time it took me to walk 50 meters. I had saved myself. But I had no idea what I had just agreed to do. The officer's name was Klaus Koch, Hauptsturmführer, to be precise. A captain in the SS assigned to administrative duties at the camp. His office was warm. Impossibly warm. A coal stove burned in the corner. There were books on shelves. A photograph of a woman and a child on his desk. Normal things. Human things. It made the horror of where we were even more obscene. He offered me a chair. I stood. Prisoners don't sit. Sit, he said, not unkindly, as if this were a normal conversation. I sat. You're Persian, he said. From Tehran? Yes, sir. How did you end up in Belgium? I hadn't prepared for questions. I invented frantically. My father was a merchant. Carpets. He had business in Brussels. We moved there when I was young. And you still speak Farsi? Of course. It's my mother tongue. He leaned back in his chair, studied me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I want to learn Persian, he said. After the war, I plan to open a restaurant. In Tehran, or perhaps Paris, somewhere civilized. I've always been fascinated by Persian culture, the poetry, the cuisine, the language. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man, this Nazi, this officer in a death camp was talking about opening a restaurant, about poetry and cuisine, as if he were planning a pleasant retirement, not participating in genocide. You'll teach me, he said. 1 hour every evening. If you do well, you'll receive extra rations, better treatment. Perhaps you'll even survive this war. He smiled, as if he were doing me a tremendous favor. Do we have an agreement? What could I say? No? Yes, sir. I'll teach you. Good, we'll start tomorrow. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. As I was escorted back to the barracks, my mind raced. I had just promised to teach Persian to a Nazi officer, and I didn't speak a single word of Persian. I had perhaps 24 hours to invent a language. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, my mind spinning through possibilities. How does one invent a language? What makes words sound Persian? What grammar rules would seem plausible? I knew nothing about Farsi except what little I'd heard in passing. It had a different alphabet, I knew that much. The sounds were unfamiliar to European ears. That gave me some freedom, but I needed a system. I couldn't just make random sounds. Coke would expect consistency. If I taught him a word one day, I'd need to remember it the next dot, and then I had an idea. A terrible, beautiful idea. I would use the names of the prisoners. Every man in this camp who was forgotten, who had become just a number, I would make them into words, into a language. I would teach Klaus Koch to speak the names of his victims without him ever knowing. David. The man in the bunk below mine would become bread. Samuel, who died of typhus the week before, would become water. Isaac, shot for being too slow, would become tomorrow. I would build an entire vocabulary from the names of the dead and dying. And every time Koch spoke this fake Persian, he would be commemorating the people he was helping to murder. It was madness. But it was all I had. The next evening, a guard came to fetch me. I was taken to Koch's office, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. He was waiting, a notebook and pen ready on his desk. "Sit," he said. "Let's begin with basics. Greetings. How do you say hello in Persian?" I hesitated. This was it. The first word. Once I spoke it, there was no going back. "Dovid," I said, using the Yiddish pronunciation of David's name. "Dovid?" He wrote it down. "And goodbye?" I thought of Avram, who'd been taken away that morning. Avram. Interesting. The sounds are quite guttural. Now, teach me some simple words. Common objects. For the next hour, I invented. I pulled names from memory, men I'd known in Brussels, men from the camp, men I'd seen die. I gave each name a meaning, assigned each prisoner a place in my false language. Chaim became sky. Moshe became fire. Yitzhak became hope. Koch wrote everything down meticulously. He repeated each word, practicing pronunciation, asking about conjugation and grammar rules I had to invent on the spot. "In Persian," I said, improvising wildly, "verbs don't conjugate by tense. Context determines timing, and there's no gender distinction in nouns." I had no idea if this was true, but it made my job easier. Fewer rules meant fewer chances to contradict myself. "Fascinating," Koch said. "Such an elegant language. So different from German." He seemed genuinely pleased. Like a child learning something new. When the hour ended, he dismissed me with a nod. "You did well. Tomorrow we'll continue." Oh, and Reza. He used the false Persian name I'd given him. "You'll receive double rations starting tonight." Can't have my teacher starving, can we? A guard escorted me to the kitchen. They gave me a bowl of actual soup, not the watery slop we usually received, but something with chunks of potato and meat. Real food. I ate it slowly, forcing myself not to cry. because this was the price of my survival. Teaching a Nazi, taking better rations while men around me died, becoming complicit in my own way, but I was alive. And as long as I was alive, there was a chance. The lessons continued. Every evening, 6 o'clock, I would sit in Coke's warm office while the camp froze outside, and I would teach him words that didn't exist. I created sentences, stories, whole conversations in this invented tongue. "How do you say I want to open a restaurant?" he asked one evening. I thought of Levi, the baker, Jacob, who dreamed of owning a cafe in Vienna, Reuben, who used to tell stories about his mother's cooking. "Levi, Jacob, Reuben, Meshullam," I said, stringing names together into nonsense that sounded exotic to his German ear. "Beautiful," he breathed. "Say it again." And he repeated after me, his voice carrying the names of dead Jews like a prayer. He didn't understand. Sometimes he would test me, ask me to repeat a word from a previous lesson. This is what I'd feared most, forgetting which name meant what, contradicting myself, exposing the lie. But I had a system. Every night after returning to the barracks, I would whisper the words to myself. David is bread, Samuel is water, Isaac is tomorrow, building my false language into memory through repetition. The other prisoners noticed my better treatment, the extra rations, the fact that I was pulled from heavy labor. Some were grateful I shared food when I could, slipping bread to David, to men who were too weak to work. Others were suspicious. "What are you doing for them?" A man named Joseph hissed at me one night. "What have you become?" I couldn't explain. Couldn't tell him about the language, about the lie I was living every single day. He wouldn't understand. He'd think I was collaborating. Betraying us, Dot, maybe I was. But I was alive. Weeks became months. The war ground on. We heard rumors from new arrivals. The Germans were losing ground in Russia. The Americans had landed in Italy. The tide was turning, but in the camp nothing changed. Men still died. The crematorium still burned. And I still sat in Coke's office every evening, teaching him to speak the names of ghosts. He was learning quickly. His vocabulary grew. He could construct simple sentences, tell stories about his imagined restaurant. "When this war is over," he told me one evening, "I'll go to Tehran. I'll open a small place, traditional Persian food. You must come. You can help me. Be my partner." He was serious. In his mind, we would survive this war together and open a restaurant, as if we were friends, as if he weren't the guard and I the prisoner, as if thousands weren't dying around us. I nodded, smiled, said, "Baruch," the name of a boy who'd been shot for stealing bread, which I'd told him meant yes, with great pleasure. But something in his face had changed. He was looking at me differently, with something almost like affection. Dot. It terrified me. Because if he started to care about me, to see me as human, what would happen when he discovered the truth? And eventually he would. That was inevitable. A German who actually spoke Persian would arrive, or the war would end, and he'd try to use his new language and discover it was meaningless. Or I'd make a mistake, contradict myself, forget which name meant what. The lie couldn't last forever. The close call came. 6 months into our lessons, a new officer arrived at the camp. An older man, transferred from somewhere in the east. His name was Miller, and he had served in Persia before the war. He spoke Farsi. Real Farsi. I saw him talking to Coke one afternoon. Saw Coke gesture toward me with excitement. Saw my death approaching with the clarity of a bullet's trajectory. That evening, Coke was almost giddy when I arrived for our lesson. Wonderful news, Reza. Hauptmann Muller served in Tehran. He speaks Persian fluently. He'll be joining us tomorrow. You can have a real conversation. It will be such good practice for both of us. My blood turned to ice. Tomorrow? I managed. Yes, 6 o'clock. I've told him all about you. He's eager to meet a fellow Persian speaker. I left that office knowing I had 24 hours to live. There was no escape. No way out? When Muller spoke to me in real Farsi and I couldn't respond, the game would be over. Coke would realize I'd deceived him, and deception of an SS officer meant death. Probably not a quick one. I considered running. But where? The camp was surrounded by guards, fences, dogs. I considered confessing, throwing myself on Coke's mercy, begging forgiveness, but I knew how that would end. He might claim to care about me, but I was still a Jew, still worthless in his eyes, no matter how many fake Persian words I'd taught him. I spent that night in the barracks, unable to speak. David asked me what was wrong. I couldn't tell him. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn and my execution. But dawn brought something else. Air raid sirens. American bombers. They'd found the camp or something near it. The bombs began falling at 5 in the morning. The guards scrambled. Prisoners were ordered to the shelters, or rather, the guards ran to the shelters and left us to whatever fate the bombs decided. The raid lasted 2 hours. Buildings were hit. Part of the camp caught fire. And in the chaos, the smoke and confusion, Hauptmann Muller was killed by falling debris. I learned this from Coke himself that evening. He was shaken. Perhaps the first time I'd seen him genuinely affected by death. Not the death of prisoners, those didn't seem to touch him, but the death of a fellow German officer. Muller is dead, he said. I had looked forward to your conversation. Now, ... He trailed off, staring at nothing. I expressed my condolences in fake Persian, the name of Aaron, which I designated as sorrow. He nodded. Yes, Aaron. Thank you, Reza. And the lesson continued. I had been saved by American bombs, by random chance, by a piece of debris that fell on the right man at the right time. It was a miracle, or perhaps just luck. In a place like this, you learned not to see much difference between the two, but it reinforced something I'd known all along. My survival hung by the thinnest thread. One wrong word, one moment of bad luck, one real Persian speaker who didn't die in an air raid. Any of it could end me. So I became more careful, more methodical. I kept a mental catalog of every word I invented, every name I used. I built consistency into my false language, created patterns that seemed natural, that would stand up to Coke's growing knowledge. And he was learning. By the winter of 1943, he could hold entire conversations in my invented Persian, could tell stories about his childhood, his dreams, his plans for after the war, all in the names of dead Jews. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if what I was doing mattered. If this strange memorial I was building, this language made of victims' names, meant anything to anyone but me. The men whose names I used were dead. They didn't know I'd immortalized them in fake grammar lessons. They didn't care, but I cared, because every time Coke said Shlomo thinking he was saying beautiful, I remembered Shlomo from Warsaw, who'd drawn pictures in the dirt, too, entertained the children before he was hanged for, stealing Dot every time he said Benzion believing. It meant, tomorrow. I remembered Benzion, who'd taught mathematics in Vienna and died of pneumonia in the barracks. I was keeping them alive in the smallest, strangest way. I was making sure they weren't just numbers, weren't just ash. They were a language, my language, a memorial built from lies. The winter of 1943 became the spring of 1944. The rumors grew stronger. The Allies were winning. The Germans were retreating on all fronts, but the camps intensified. More transports arrived. More Jews, more Roma, more Soviet prisoners. The crematoriums worked day and night. Coke seemed anxious. He knew, as we all knew, that the end was coming, but he clung to his fantasy, his restaurant, his escape to Tehran. When we get there, he told me one evening, you'll introduce me to your family. Your father, the carpet merchant. I'd love to meet him. My father was dead, killed in the first days of the German occupation of Belgium. But Coke didn't know that. In his mind, my invented Persian family was waiting for us in an invented Tehran, where we'd all run an invented restaurant together. I nodded. Said Emmanuel, my father's actual name, which I'd told Coke meant it would be my honor. He smiled. It was obscene. This intimacy between us, this relationship built on lies and death, and the pretense that we were anything other than what we were, murderer and victim, playing at friendship across the chasm of genocide, what had kept me alive. So I played along. In July 1944, we heard that the Russians were advancing. In August, Paris was liberated. By autumn, it was clear that Germany would lose. The mood in the camp changed. The guards became more brutal, as if they could beat back the inevitable. Executions increased. They were destroying evidence, burning records, eliminating witnesses. Coke seemed distant, distracted. Our lessons became irregular. Sometimes he'd cancel, claiming administrative duties. Sometimes he'd sit in silence for long stretches, staring at nothing. Do you think we'll lose? He asked me one evening. Direct, unexpected. I didn't know how to answer. The wrong response could be fatal. The war will end, I said carefully. All wars end, and then? Then we rebuild. Find a new life, he laughed, bitter, hollow. A new life. Yes, perhaps in Tehran, perhaps in hell. I suspect there's little difference for men like me. It was the first time he'd acknowledged what he was, what he'd done, and for a moment I saw something in his face. Not quite remorse, but awareness, understanding that there would be a reckoning. You should go back to the barracks, he said quietly. It's not safe for you to be seen with me anymore. Some of the other officers, they're becoming suspicious, asking questions about why I keep a prisoner alive. What will happen to the lessons? He looked at me, really looked at me, and I wondered if he knew, if he'd always known, if the whole time he'd understood that I was lying, and he'd let me anyway because the lie was more comforting than the truth. The lessons are over, he said. Go back, survive if you can. I stood, walked to the door, turned back. "Thank you," I said, in French, not in fake Persian. In my real voice, he nodded once, and I left. I never saw Klaus Koch again. The camp was liberated on January 27th, 1945. Soviet troops. They came in the morning when the guards had already fled, leaving us alive but barely. We were skeletons, half dead, too weak to celebrate. I remember standing in the snow, watching the Soviet soldiers approach. Young men horrified by what they were seeing. They gave us food, blankets, medical care. I was alive. Against all probability, against every logical expectation, I had survived. Of the hundreds who arrived with me on that transport in 1942, I was one of perhaps 20 who lived to see liberation. The rest were ash, were bones in mass graves, were numbers and ledgers that the Germans had tried to burn, but they were also words now, words in a language that never existed, words that Klaus Koch spoke in his dreams of Persian restaurants and civilized futures. I never learned what happened to Koch. I heard rumors that he was captured by the Soviets, or that he escaped to South America, or that he died in the final days of the war. I hope he survived. I hope he tried to use his Persian in Tehran. I hope he spoke to an actual Persian speaker and realized what I'd done, that every word he'd learned was the name of someone he'd helped to kill. I hope it haunted him, but probably it didn't. Probably he never thought about me again. Probably I was just a footnote in his war, a brief curiosity, nothing more, but he was everything to me. Because teaching him lies kept me alive. Because every fake word I invented was an act of resistance. Because in a place designed to erase us, I found a way to make us matter. I went back to Belgium after the war. What was left of it? Found that my family was gone. All of them. My parents, my sister, everyone I'd known before. I was alone. But I was alive. I never spoke about the camp. Not for years. People didn't want to hear. They wanted to forget. Move on. Rebuild. But I couldn't forget. How could I? I carried an entire language in my head. A language made of names. Made of the dead. Sometimes late at night I still remember the words. Still whisper them to myself. David, Samuel, Isaac, Chaim, Moshe, Yitzhak, bread, water, tomorrow, sky, fire, hope. I am the only person who ever spoke this language fluently. The only person who knows that when Klaus Koch said, "I love Persian," food, he was actually saying, "I love Mordecai." Lipschitz Abraham Stern. It's absurd, tragic, ridiculous, and profound all at once, but it saved my life, and in a strange way it saved theirs too, because I remembered them. I spoke their names even if no one else understood what I was saying. That's all we can do for the dead, isn't it? Remember, speak their names. Keep them alive in whatever way we can. I invented a language to survive the Holocaust, but in doing so I created a memorial, a testament, a way of saying, these people existed, these people mattered, these people were not just numbers, they were words, they were a language, they were everything. And as long as I'm alive, as long as I remember, they still are. My name is Gilles. I am 83 years old now. I live in a small apartment in Brussels, in a neighborhood that was rebuilt after the war, on a street that no longer bears the scars of occupation. Sometimes young people come to interview me. They want to hear about the camps, about survival, about resistance. I tell them about the language, about teaching Persian to a Nazi officer, about turning the names of the dead into words for bread and water and tomorrow. They don't always believe me. It sounds too much like fiction, too absurd to be true, but I have proof. Not documents, not recordings, just this. I remember every word, every single word I invented. I can still speak the entire language, though there's no one left who would understand it. Coke is dead. The prisoners whose names I used are dead. I am the last speaker of a language that never existed, carrying it into whatever time I have left. And when I die, it will die with me, but that's all right, because it was never meant to last forever. It was only meant to last long enough to save one life, long enough to honor the others, long enough to prove that even in the darkest places, even when everything is taken from you, you can still create something, even if it's just lies, even if it's just words, even if it's just the names of the dead, spoken by a man who didn't understand what he was saying. That's enough. That has to be enough. I was standing in the snow, and I was about to die, but I invented a language. And I lived, and every word I taught was a name. And every name was a person, and every person mattered. That's my story. That's how I survived by turning the dead into words, and teaching those words to the man who helped kill them. It's absurd. It's terrible. It's beautiful. It's the truth. And now you know it, too. Asterisk, but there's more. There are moments I haven't told you yet. Moments that still wake me in the night, decades later. Let me take you back. Back to the winter of 1944, when everything nearly fell apart. It was February. The coldest winter I can remember. Men were dying faster than usual, not from bullets or gas, but from the simple, brutal mathematics of cold plus starvation plus exhaustion. Coke had been teaching me more about his dreams, his restaurant, the specific dishes he wanted to serve. And this presented a new problem. I had to invent not just words, but an entire cuisine, a culture, a world. Tell me about Persian food, he said one evening, his eyes bright with anticipation. Your mother's cooking. What did she make for special occasions? I thought of my real mother, her Shabbat dinners, the chicken soup, the braided challah, all of it forbidden to mention. My mother. I began slowly, made a dish called Ephraim. Ephraim, a boy from Luge who'd arrived on a transport 3 weeks earlier, 12 years old, dead within 5 days. Ephraim, Coke repeated, writing it down. What's in it? I invented frantically. Rice, saffron, lamb, and a special spice we call pinchas. Pinchas, who'd taught Hebrew in Warsaw. You cook it slowly for hours until the flavors become shiman. Shiman, the word I'd designated as unified or together. Coke was enraptured. And for dessert? Dessert. I smiled, though my heart was breaking. We have a pastry, very sweet, filled with honey and nuts. We call it Mendel. Mendel. He'd been a watchmaker in Prague. Hands so steady he could repair anything. Those hands had been unable to stop shaking in the cold. He'd died the previous morning. When we open the restaurant, Coke said, you'll teach the chef these recipes. We'll serve authentic Persian cuisine. I nodded, knowing that if any of this fake food was ever prepared, it would be named after dead children and murdered scholars. A feast of ghosts. But then he said something that made my blood freeze. I've been corresponding with a colleague in Berlin. He spent time in Persia in the 1930s. I've mentioned you to him. He's very interested to meet you when he visits next month. Another Persian speaker. Another death sentence approaching like a slow train. Next month? I managed to say, yes, Standerton for Reinhardt. He'll be inspecting the camp. I've told him all about my Persian lessons. He's quite impressed. I had 4 weeks. 4 weeks before a real Persian speaker would expose me. That night I couldn't eat the extra rations they gave me. My stomach had turned stone. David noticed. What's wrong? He whispered from his bunk. I told him. For the first time I told someone the whole truth. About the language. About Coke. About the approaching inspection. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you have to run. Run where? There's nowhere to go. Then you have to tell Coke the truth before the other officer arrives. Beg for mercy. He'll kill me. Maybe, maybe not. But if you wait for Reinhardt to expose you, Coke will feel humiliated, betrayed. That's worse than just lying. That's making a fool of him. I knew David was right, but I couldn't do it. Every day I told myself, tomorrow I'll confess. Tomorrow I'll face it. But tomorrow kept not coming. The lessons continued. Coke was excited about Reinhardt's visit. He practiced his Persian constantly, wanted to show off how much he'd learned. Teach me a poem, he said one evening. Something beautiful. Something I can recite for Reinhardt. A poem. In a language that didn't exist. I closed my eyes. Thought of all the men I'd known. All the names I carried. In Persian poetry, I said, we have a form called the Yakov. It's like your German verse, but the rhythm is different. Yakov had been a violinist from Budapest. He'd played for us, sometimes in the barracks, humming melodies, because he had no instrument. The Yakov has 5 lines, I continued. Each line must contain a name of person you remember, and the final line must be a blessing. I made it up as I spoke, but it felt right, true in a way that transcended the lie. Recite one for me, Coke said. I took a breath, and then I spoke in my invented Persian, creating a poem from the names of the dead. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe Raphael, Benzion, Shlomo, David, Shem, Mendel, Levi, Shimon, Ephraim, Pinchas, Yusuf, Asher, Baruch, 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 blessed, blessed, blessed. Coke was silent. Then, quietly, what does it mean? It's a poem about memory, I said, about carrying the names of those we love. Each name is a person from my childhood in Tehran, and the final word Baruch means may they be remembered forever. It's beautiful, he whispered. Teach me to say it. And so Klaus Koch learned to recite a prayer for Jewish victims. Thinking he was speaking Persian poetry, the irony was so sharp it could cut. 3 weeks before Reinhardt's visit, something unexpected happened. Koch received orders. He was being transferred. Not immediately, but soon. Perhaps in 2 months. It's a promotion, he told me almost apologetically. A larger camp. More responsibility. But I'm sad to leave. We won't finish your language lessons. I should have been relieved. If he was transferring before Reinhardt arrived, the inspection wouldn't matter. Coke would be gone. I'd be, what? Returned to regular prisoner status? Killed? What will happen to me? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. I don't know. You'll go back to the regular work assignments. I can't protect you anymore, and when Reinhardt visits, he's not coming to see you. He's coming to inspect the camp. You'll be fine. Just keep your head down. But I knew better. Reinhardt would hear about me, would ask questions, would want to meet the Persian Jew who'd taught Coke. And when I couldn't speak, Farsi ... I had perhaps 6 weeks to live. Maybe less ... the lessons became more intense. Coke wanted to learn as much as possible before he left. We met twice a day sometimes, morning and evening. He was obsessed with mastering the language, and I was obsessed with survival, because I'd realized something. If Coke truly believed in his Persian, if he was confident enough in what I'd taught him, maybe he wouldn't bring Reinhardt to meet me. Maybe he'd just boast about his accomplishments and move on ... so I made him confident. I praised his pronunciation, told him his accent was perfect, created more complex sentences, more elaborate stories, all to convince him that he'd truly mastered this language. You speak like a native now, I lied. Better than many Persians I knew in Tehran. He beamed. Really? Really? You have a gift for languages. It was working. His ego was inflating. He started to believe he didn't need me anymore, that he'd learned enough ... and then 1 week before Reinhardt's scheduled visit, Coke called me to his office. Sit, he said. His face was grave. I sat, my heart hammering. I've been thinking, he began, about you, about what happens when I leave. This was it. He was going to kill me, get rid of the loose end before his transfer. I want to do something for you, he said. You've been a good teacher. You've given me something valuable, a skill I'll use after the war. I said nothing, waited. I'm going to arrange a transfer for you to a work detail outside the camp. A farm. It's hard labor, but the conditions are better. More food, less death. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why? Because I'm not a monster, he said quietly. Despite what you might think, despite where we are, I know what happens to men like you when they lose their usefulness. I don't want that for you. Was it guilt? Sentiment? Or just the last vestige of the human being he'd been before the war turned him into this? I'll never know. Thank you, I said. In French, in my real voice, he nodded. The transfer happens tomorrow. You'll leave before Reinhardt arrives. You'll be safe. Safe. That word in this place was almost obscene. But it was something. A chance. The next morning I was taken from the barracks. David grabbed my hand. You're leaving? Farm detail. Coke arranged it. You lucky bastard, he said. But his eyes were wet. Survive. You have to survive. Tell them what happened here. I will, I promised. I'll remember all of you. And I meant it, because they were already part of my language, part of the strange memorial I carried in my head. The farm was exactly as Coke described. Hard work, but real food. A barn to sleep in instead of those death barracks. Guards who hit you but didn't shoot you for sport. I was there when the war ended. April 1945. We woke one morning, and the guards were gone. Just ... And then American soldiers arrived, looking shocked at what they found. Even at this relatively good labor camp, I survived. Against every probability. Against logic itself. I learned later that Koch was captured by the British, tried for war crimes. He hanged in 1947. I don't know if he ever tried to speak his Persian. If he ever discovered what I'd done. Part of me hopes he did. Part of me hopes he died still believing. But here's what I do know. In his final letters, which were published after the trial, he wrote about his dreams, his restaurant, his plans, and he wrote, "I learned Persian from a teacher I'll never forget. He taught me that even in the darkest places there is still beauty, still culture, still hope." When I read that, I wept, because he never understood. The beauty wasn't in the fake words I taught him. The beauty was in the names. In the memorial I built from lies. After the war, I tried to live. One married, had children, worked as a translator, ironically enough, using the real languages I knew, French, German, English. But at night I still spoke Persian. My Persian, the language of the dead. My wife heard me once, murmuring in my sleep. "What language is that?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just a dream." But it wasn't nothing. It was Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. It was Moshe and Chaim and David. It was every man whose name I'd turned into a word for bread or water or tomorrow or hope. I'm old now. My children are grown. My grandchildren ask me about the war. I tell them some things. Not everything. How can you explain something like this? How can you make them understand? But I tell them about the language, and I teach them a few words. Not the whole vocabulary, that would take years, but a few words. I teach them that Chaim means sky, that David means bread, that Mendel means sweet, and I tell them these were real people, real men, and this is how I kept them alive. My grandson, who's studying linguistics at university, once asked me, "Did you ever write it down? The full language? For historians?" I haven't, because once it's written, it becomes an artifact, a curiosity, something scholars can study and dissect. But as long as it lives only in my memory, only in my voice, it remains what it always was, a prayer, a memorial, a way of saying their names. Still, I know I won't live forever. I'm 83. My memory isn't what it was. Sometimes I forget which name meant which word. I mix up Yaakov and Yosef, confuse Raphael and Reuben. This terrifies me, because when I die, the language dies. And when the language dies, that particular memorial, that specific way of remembering, dies too. So maybe I will write it down. Maybe I'll create a dictionary, a grammar book, a testament. Not for scholars, but for the dead, so that somewhere in some archive there will be a record that says, these were their names, these were words, these were human beings who mattered. I learned something in that camp, something about language and memory and survival. I learned that words have power, not because they communicate meaning. My words communicated nothing real, but because they preserve dignity. They transform numbers back into names. The Nazis wanted to erase us, make us anonymous, turn us into statistics. into ash. But I fought back with the only weapon I had, language. Fake language, yes. Invented words. But each word was a name. Each sentence was a memorial. Each lesson was an act of resistance. That's what they could never understand. That's what Coke never knew. He thought he was learning Persian, but what he was really learning was the names of his victims. And every time he spoke that language, every time he conjugated those verbs and recited those poems, he was commemorating the people he'd helped to destroy. There's justice in that. Poetic justice. The kind that doesn't bring anyone back or undo any suffering, but that matters anyway, because we need these small victories, these moments of human dignity in the face of inhumanity, these tiny rebellions against erasure. I was standing in the snow, about to die, and I invented a language, and I lived, but more than that, they lived, through me. Through my words, through the strange and possible memorial I built in the mind of a Nazi officer who thought he was learning to order food in Tehran. That's my legacy. That's what I leave behind. Not wealth or fame or conventional accomplishments. But this, I kept their names alive. I turned the dead into words. And I made sure that even in their deaths, they had meaning. They had presence. They had voiced God, and now, through telling you this story, they have voice again. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Raphael, Ben-Zion, Shlomo, David, Chaim, Mendel, Levi, Shimon, Ephraim, Pinchas, Yosef, Asher. Baruch, 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 blessed, 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 may they be remembered forever. That's the truth, the whole truth. And now you carry it too.